Welcome. My name is Jim Gordon. I'm Associate Dean and Chair of Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy at USC. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. We are here today to honor the memory of Helen Hislop. We hope that the remembrances offered in the next hour will stimulate the memories of those who knew her and enlighten those who did not. We are also here for a larger purpose, to inscribe those recollections into our collective memory, our shared narrative of who we are and how we came to be here in this place and time in history. Before I begin, I want to note that many individuals wrote to us to say that they were unable to come. I want to especially recognize Dan Erb, who is on faculty at Duke and is now at High Point University in North Carolina. Dan lived near Dr. Hislop in her last years when she lived in Durham and later when she moved to High Point. Dan and his family took special care of Helen over the years. We are forever grateful to Dan for his generosity and his devotion to Helen. Let me say a few words about what Dr. Hislop accomplished in her lifetime. She was a New Jersey girl who went to a small college in Iowa and was turned on by science. She intended to get a PhD right away, but by some happy coincidences, she decided to become a physical therapist first. Like many in her generation, she cut her clinical teeth by treating patients with polio. She quickly realized that the clinical practice of physical therapy needed a stronger scientific foundation. So she went back to University of Iowa for a master's in physiology in 1953 and a PhD in 1960. At the time, one could probably count the number of physical therapists with a PhD on one hand. In the early 1960s, Dr. Hislop became the editor of the Physical Therapy Journal, and over the next decade transformed it into a respected scientific journal that played an essential role in initiating a scientific revolution in the profession. She came to Southern California in 1968 to recuperate from back surgery, and she was asked to take on a director of research position at Rancho Los Amigos Rehabilitation Hospital. At almost the very same time, USC's physical therapy program moved to the Rancho campus. Thus was created, partly by accident and partly by design, a brilliant recipe. Mixed together orthopedic surgeons like Vern Nickel and Jacqueline Perry, physical therapists like Viola Robbins, Hazel Adkins, Jackie Montgomery, and Maureen Rogers, and add in a generous dose of Helen Hislop. Saute for a few years, and rehabilitation and physical therapy would never be the same. Before too long, Dr. Hislop was named professor and chair of USC's physical therapy program, and she didn't waste any time. She initiated the first master's degrees for clinical specialists, the first PhD in physical therapy, and the first doctor of physical therapy degree. Even more important, she understood that a world-class program required outstanding faculty, and she spent the next 25 years recruiting and nurturing that faculty. In 1975, Dr. Hislop gave the 10th Mary McMillan Lecture, which she titled The Not So Impossible Dream. This lecture is the single most influential publication of its kind in the history of our profession. It is still quoted and cited today. In the lecture, she put forth a bold vision for physical therapy that set an agenda for the next 30 years. In particular, she proposed that physical therapy needed its own foundation science and that it should be pathokinesiology, the science of movement, which later became biokinesiology. Here at USC, we are acutely aware that we live in a world that was created by Helen Hislop and her generation of leaders. We look around, we see the fruits of her labors, the institution that she built. In the physical therapy profession at the national level and even internationally, we also know that we live in a world created by Helen Hislop. We see our profession's PhDs, its clinical specialists, its doctors of physical therapy, its science of physical therapy. All of this we owe to the courage and vision of Helen Hislop. Next, I will ask Reverend Frank Wolf to come to the podium. He will deliver the invocation.
I bring you greetings this afternoon from Dean Varun Soni, Dean of Religious Life at the University of Southern California, and from Associate Dean James Burklow, neither of whom were able to be with us today. And they have asked me to represent the Office of Religious Life in this important moment. So I invite us today to be in a spirit of meditation, a spirit of quietness, as we consider the life of Helen Hislop. Creator of all that has been, all that is, and all that ever shall be, you have given us life, filling us with hopes and dreams, with questions and wonder, with curiosity and a desire to learn. We give you thanks today for the life and legacy of Professor Helen Hislop, who served this university, its faculty, and its students for more than 3 decades. We thank you for her compassion that guided her into the work of physical therapy and biokinesiology, and for her great desire to improve the lives of the people who came to her seeking help. We especially thank you for her struggle to help those with physical impairments achieve self-determination and maintain self-esteem. We thank you for her curiosity that led her to engage in visionary work to transform the field of physical therapy into a strong, vital, and critical science governed by the principles, procedures, and rules of evidence that govern all true sciences. We thank you for her passion to provide her students with the very best education possible, a passion that led her to innovate and reform the way that education in physical therapy was done, a passion that impelled her to ensure that her students were fully prepared with the scientific knowledge and clinical experience that they needed to become excellent physical therapists, researchers, and teachers. We thank you for her deep loyalty to this university and for her decades of work to make the USC Division of Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy into a model program that attracts students from around the world and sets the standard for academic institutions worldwide. We thank you for her life, which she willingly and openly shared with so many. Even as we mourn her death, we remember and applaud the fact that her life has been good, even exceptional, and that her work has transformed this world in ways that have truly made a difference. Bless her colleagues, bless her students, bless all who have loved and honored her. May they find comfort in the memories of her presence among us, and may their hearts be joyful even in the midst of grief for the privilege of having known and been touched by this remarkable woman. Amen.
Now, Mr. Gregory McMillan, Helen's cousin, will say a few words.
Thank you, Jim. I want to first thank USC for their generosity in welcoming my wife and I here from Albany, New York. And I want to thank them for the timing also. We made it out before the polar vortex hit upstate New York. Thank you so much for that as well. My dad and Helen Jean, by the way, it's Helen Jean for the family. It's just Helen Jean. When I hear people talking about Helen, I'm not sure who they're talking about. But my dad and Helen Jean, first cousins. My grandfather and Helen Jean's mom were brother and sister. And when my dad quit high school when he was 17 to join up to go to Europe, World War II. He was 4 years older than Helen J. And when he came back, he had to get his graduate, his GED, and he went on to Central College in Pella, Iowa, where Helen Jean was already, I think she was a sophomore by then, and my dad was a freshman. And she always lorded it over him that even though she was 4 years younger, she was a year ahead of him in college. So it was, they were very, very close. When we came out this week, we were fortunate to be able to go up to San Mateo. Helen Jean wanted her ashes to be interred in a cemetery, Skylawn Cemetery overlooking Half Moon Bay. So on Thursday, my wife and I went up. It is a lovely, lovely spot. She couldn't have picked a nicer spot. It's just beautiful. So the ceremony was on Thursday. It was really very, very nice. We were so fortunate to be able to be there. She would be very, very pleased to be there, not in this circumstance, I'm sure, but she would be very, very pleased with this wonderful turnout. I want to echo what Jim Gordon said about Dan Erb. We were lucky enough to meet Dan when we would visit Helen in High Point. Helen Jean, excuse me, I'm now calling her Helen, in High Point, and Dan was wonderful. He was just wonderful. And he would go to see her, all the time. We were in Albany, New York, too far to go on a regular basis, but he was just absolutely wonderful. And some personal circumstances prevented Dan from coming out here, but I know he would be very, very pleased to be here. But I just want to very quickly leave, when we saw the pictures that were here of her professional career, I didn't know too much about Helen Jean's professional career, but when I was a kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, so this was late 50s, around there, 59 maybe, something like that. In that era, we would go down from Albany down to Linden, where she was living, and she would take me and my brother and my sister to Asbury Park on the Jersey Shore, which was, for a 7 or 8 year old, a little dangerous and little skeevy at times on the boardwalk. And she would take us on all the rides and spoil us rotten with cotton candy and do the boardwalk and skee ball and all those different things. And the one picture that would just be great to be here would be us on the roller coaster with Helen Jean screaming her head off. That would be a picture I'd love to see here, because when she took us to the Jersey Shore, it was a crusade. We were going to have fun, and boy, we were going to have fun. And she was great. I miss her already. She was really, really wonderful. She was one of the smartest people I've ever met. One of the most stubborn people I've ever met. But really a wonderful, wonderful person. Again, I want to thank you all for coming here today. It's a wonderful memorial to her. The rest of my family, all on the East Coast, my mom, who was 85, living in Florida, would have loved to have come. She really would have loved to have been here, but it was just too much. So again, I want to thank you very much for being here today, for all of this. It's just really lovely. Thank you very much.
Next, we'll hear from Janine Gunn, who is a member of the APTA's Board of Directors and also an alumna of the USC Physical Therapy Program, and she'll speak on behalf of the association.
Thank you, Jim. I feel privileged to be here on behalf of the American Physical Therapy Association to honor the life and the legacy of Dr. Hislop, whose tireless work in physical therapy education and research helped to shape our profession. She gave selflessly to APTA, and for that, we are very grateful. In 1975, Helen was selected as the 10th recipient of the Mary McMillan Lecture Award. This award acknowledges and honors an APTA member who has made distinguished contribution to the profession of physical therapy in areas of administration, education, patient care, or research. On June 17th, in 1975, here in Anaheim, California, Helen delivered her momentous lecture, The Not So Impossible Dream, in which she articulated a vision for the future of the physical therapy profession, one unified by shared values, shared beliefs, and shared attitudes. The not-so-impossible dream Helen spoke of nearly 40 years ago is now a reality because she had the courage to dream and a vision for what our profession should aspire to be. Today, most physical therapists are graduating with a Doctor of Physical Therapy degree. We have Helen to thank for that. She played an integral role in the development of physical therapy post-professional program, which is now known as the DPT, which integrated research with practice, introduced clinical specialization, expanded clinical internship programs, and created physical therapy residencies. In 1991, Helen's skills as a critical thinker and writer were recognized when APTA established the Helen J. Hislop Award for Outstanding Contributions to the Profession of Literature. The award is given to a physical therapist who have been actively engaged in writing and publishing professional literature for a sustained period of not less than 10 years. Helen herself was the recipient of the Lucy Blair Service Award and was named a Catherine Worthingham Fellow in 1983 for impact and contribution to the profession she so dutifully served. Bonnie Pavanelli, who is currently the interim CEO at APTA, remembered Helen being on the board at the time and that she was the individual board member who spearheaded the creation of the Catherine Worthingham Fellows Award and then was the second recipient. And I know in the audience today we have a handful of fellows as well. We can thank Helen for that. During her prolific career, Helen volunteered her time at APTA in so many capacities. Two in particular were the editor of Physical Therapy from 1961 to 68, and as a board member on the APTA Board of Directors from 1976 to 1982. She authored more than 30 peer-reviewed publications, including research articles and editorials. Helen's enormous contributions to the physical therapy profession are her legacy, and although she is now departed, she will live on in them. They will continue to serve and guide. They will serve as a guide for those physical therapists who dare to dream and follow in her footsteps. We are indebted to her, and she will be deeply missed. Now, if I could just take a moment on a personal note, to reflect on how Dr. Hislop touched my life. I have always considered her one of my mentors who left a lasting impact on me as a person as well as a physical therapist. As a physical therapy student here at USC, she taught us there was no dream too impossible and that we were the providers of choice and that we could accomplish anything from day one of physical therapy school. She taught me the value and the expectation of being involved in our professional association, and that it was a requirement, not a luxury. And for that, I thank Dr. Hislop, and I am thankful for her mentorship. Thank you.
Helen was a master storyteller and orator. In 2010, two of our faculty, Julie Tilson and Linda Fetters, went to North Carolina, sat down with Helen, and asked her to recount some of her history in physical therapy and at USC. Between speakers this afternoon, we will play a few clips from that oral history, which, by the way, you can hear all of on our website. In this clip, you will hear Helen describing her first day at PT school.
Now get in line and march. Here we go. We're going down to the clinic. I said, the clinic? What does that mean? That's where the patients are. I said, we're not going to see patients, are we? And she overheard. She said, yes, we're going to see polio patients. So we were marched down, and there were nurses waiting for us, and we were paired off, each pair with a nurse. And the room was as big as from here over to that apartment building. And it had nothing in it but Emerson respirators and patients in the respirators. And all of us just about fainted. We'd never seen a live respirator before. We'd certainly never seen a patient in a respirator before. And it's obvious that we were going to do something with the patients in the respirators.
Next, we'll hear from Mr. Charles Magistro. Charles was president of the APTA during some of those tumultuous years. He's one of those leaders who, along with Helen, created the profession that we have today.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, I wish to thank Chris Powers for asking me to come to this function today. And I might add, had he not asked me, I would have arranged to be here. Obviously, I was very saddened to learn of Helen's passing. We were both personal and professional friends for over 60 years. I am not certain when Helen and I first met, but obviously it had to be in the early 1950s. When you get to be my age and speak to an audience who knows as much or more about the subject you are discussing, you must be prudent in talking about dates. One thing about Helen I do recall, her tenacity, a trait she developed very soon in my relationship with her. This was confirmed to me by Nancy Watts, a future Macmillan lecturer, an imposing woman in her own right. When Helen completed her education at Pella University, she soon came west to become more concerned with other affairs in her life. It was interesting that she earned her degree in her certificate of completion to become a physical therapist, and that time, after she had undergone a considerable amount of education. Helen and I met first at a conference in Los Angeles. It was the national conference, and obviously one of the greatest I have ever attended among the 50 that I have attended. At that time, Helen had assumed a position with the National Foundation of Infantile Paralysis as a go-together with arranging conferences with the national office on the state level. During those early years, Helen and I would often meet to discuss the APTA and its affairs. And this meeting in Los Angeles really bonded Helen and me for many years thereafter. The theme of that meeting was a Mexican format, and it was interesting, and I remembered well Helen going around the meetings, meeting people, wearing a zarape and a sombrero, and she was a sight to behold. By this time, many in our profession had identified Helen as a person of enormous capabilities. And in 1961, she was offered the editorship of the APTA Journal, a position she held until 1968. I believe Helen, I believe Helen was then offered the editorship of the APTA Journal, a position she held until 1968. That enabled Helen to get a platform that followed and enabled her to really perpetuate many of her ideas and visions for the profession. Excuse me. I knew this might happen if I didn't turn the pages. As I indicated, by this time, after she had joined the staff at APTA, many began to realize of the numerous capabilities and qualifications that Helen had, and as previous people have mentioned, she became editor of the journal, a position she held until 1968. I think that you have to realize that there were other imposing people in the profession. One of those was Nancy Watts. She was imposing for many reasons. Primarily, she was a tall woman. And I know none of you are going to talk about this, but I am. She and Helen played basketball in Iowa on their respective college teams. Nancy was at Grinnell. And oftentimes, Nancy and I would talk about Helen's basketball abilities. And in order to, level the playing field, Nancy always stayed. She would step on my toes. And I thought that was an interesting comment coming from an erudite person like Nancy about another erudite person like Helen. All I can say is, knowing Helen all the years I did, and I can just remember many of them very vividly. But one thing I remember above all, we didn't always disagree on things, didn't agree on things. And the only time she ever would give you an occasion to disagree with her when she said something that you didn't believe was in the best interest of the profession was rare. But by the same token, she was a remarkable woman in every respect, and I know how seriously and intently she has organized my life. Thank you for your attention.
When I arrived, not able to walk, stuck on a stretcher, the man who was the medical director of Rancho Los Amigos came to me and said, I would like you to take a job and you can do it from your stretcher. I would like you to become director of physical therapy in the Research and Training Center. I said, from here? He says, yeah, there are things to be done here. And I think you have the mind to do some things here that will make physical therapy something other than just a thing. That's exactly what he said.
Now we'll hear from two of Helen's colleagues at Rancho from the old days, Jacqueline Montgomery and Maureen Rogers.
In the late 60s, some of the movers and shakers in physical therapy and rehab were at Rancho and also in New York. Our highly esteemed and much loved director of the physical therapy department, Viola Robbins, and Hazel Adkins, who was head of our educational division, had created a postgraduate program for U.S. trained and international physical therapists. And they were brought in for a residency program to learn a number of rehab techniques that were now being applied to disabilities, including stroke, arthritis, spinal cord injury, and traumatic brain injury. A couple of others of the real movers and shakers, everyone knows of the legendary Jackie Perry, and probably not so much has been said recently, at least about Vernon Nickel. And Vernon Nickel was a real go-getter. He was out rusking Rusk, who was the father of rehab in New York. And he and Jackie Perry created an environment at Rancho that brought in some real achievers in their orthopedic residency program, the likes of Shannon Stauffer, Bert Mooney, and Doug Garland. I believe it was these four people, the movers and the shakers back then, that created the environment that allowed scholars to pursue and achieve greatness. At this same time, Robbie was on the board of directors of the American Physical Therapy Association. The association headquarters then were in New York City. Helen was in New York, editing the journal, as has been mentioned. And I believe it was Robbie and Helen's fortuitous association there that brought Helen to the environment in California that only Helen could pursue and create what she created. And Mo's going to pick up the story from there.
One of the activities of the R&T Center, which Helen was director of, was a joint undertaking between USC's Physical Therapy Department and various departments at Rancho Los Amigos Medical Center. In 1967, the RN Center developed a coalition of 3 teaching hospitals, Rancho Los Amigos, Orthopedic Hospital, and LAC USC Medical Center. With the funding from the R&T Center, Helen developed the first 1-year clinical internship program for physical therapy students throughout the country. The students rotated through the 3 hospitals. Many of the students went on to leadership roles in physical therapy departments throughout the country. At one of our casual dinners with the students and faculty, Helen mentioned the idea of a doctoral program in physical therapy. And that was met with, no way. There will never be a doctoral program in physical therapy. Well, as you know, Helen did not suffer fools gladly, and she pursued her vision. And later, some of those very students graduated from that program, the doctoral program at USC. And in 1971, under Helen's direction, a number of graduate students contributed to the establishment of a database for the energy expenditure of walking in healthy, normal individuals, as well as many patient groups. As a result of that study, along with two of the graduate students, Drs. Water and Hislop won the Richmond Award from the American Academy for Cerebral Palsy, and it became an integral part of the treatment of cerebral palsy. Another one of Helen's many gifts was her legendary skill in writing. I took advantage of that skill in 1988 when Rancho celebrated its centennial year. We hired a writer to write the book, to research it and to write it, but we were not happy with the last few chapters. Those were the years that we were all more familiar with. So I took it to Helen, and after reading it, she said, "Well, that was boring. I think this needs some serious help." So she sat down at the computer, fingers flying. I gave her dates, names, and events, and she whipped out those chapters in 2 weekends. But after reading her version, which was beautifully written, I had to say, "But Helen, that's not how some of this happened." And she said, "I never let facts interfere with a good story." But reluctantly, she made the changes, took out some of the embellishments, and we ended up with a beautifully and factual book. Helen was a great friend to Rancho and the physical therapy department. She was always so generous with her time and talents, and I feel very honored to have been an associate of Helen's and was able to work with her closely. Thank you.
I'm glad. I think I wasn't one of those fools that she didn't suffer gladly. To me, one of Helen's most endearing characteristics was her generosity, which has been mentioned. She was certainly generous of material things, but even more so of her time, her ideas, and obviously what she contributed to her world. Her Macmillan lecture has been mentioned, and the memory of that, is forever etched in my memory. I think everyone in the audience that day in Anaheim felt the same spine-tingling sensation. It was absolutely beautiful, and as you can imagine, beautifully delivered. I was going to tell you perhaps some of the lesser-known things about Helen. Charles mentioned that she was on the Central College basketball team, and to me, the incongruency of that is amazing. But if we think about, at least most of the time I have known Helen, she has been unwell. And to think of what she could have accomplished had she been well is really amazing. As early as 1972, she was in a wheelchair part-time. She and I were at a rehab meeting in Washington, And it was the weekend that Nixon, it became known as the Saturday Night Massacre. Nixon fired the special prosecutor for Watergate. Watergate now seems like a pretty petty prank, but most of you, I think, know of her love for dogs, that she raised championship Cairn Terriers. Don't know that many of you know that a silent partner in that endeavor was Bill Cosby. At one point, Judy Burnfield did a swallowing rehab program for one of her brain-damaged puppies. Helen was quite artistic. In her home, she had many beautiful mosaic tables. She was she was a wonderful drawer. In one of the editions of our muscle testing book, she personally did the cross-sectional anatomical drawings, not a medical illustrator, but Helen did them. And there's another picture I'd like for you to see, and I think we can project it. Perhaps you can't see it well. I have a copy of it if you're interested in seeing it. I can show you later. I went to her house one afternoon when we were working on one of the editions of the book, and she was doodling on a sketch pad, and she simply doodled this beautiful eagle, and I admired it, and she said, "Well, do you want it?" And I said, "Of course," and she signed it over to me. Now, a person of so many talents surely has at least one flaw. Indeed. With her breadth and scope of knowledge, have you ever known anyone with so little information about nutrition? She believed the major food groups were meat, carbs, and Stouffer's frozen mac and cheese. At any one moment in her freezer, there would be a minimum of 10 boxes. Should a fresh vegetable of any kind, enter her body, it would have been rejected as a foreign object. Helen, we love you, we miss you, and you have enriched so many people's lives. Thank you so much.
It was a huge step, and I knew I was taking not only a personal risk, but I was taking a professional risk. But I didn't think we could continue to survive as a profession that had only a master's degree. We would never get the research we wanted to get if we only hired people who had PhDs in something else and did not get the whole gestalt of what it takes to be a researcher and to do research that has primary focus in PT.
And now let me introduce that first PhD in physical therapy, Dr. Mary Beth Brown.
This past year, we lost two of the brightest beacons the physical therapy profession and physical therapy program at USC has ever known. These were extraordinary women who changed the course of our professional training and developed today's standards for academic success. Both Jackie Perry and Helen understood the concept of evidence-based practice before it even had a name. I met Helen in 1972 as an applicant to the master's degree program at USC. I knew nothing of Helen when I walked into the department, but when I emerged, an indelible impression had been formed. As I was sitting in the waiting room, Helen emerged from her office, and never before or since have I been so stunned by the sheer presence of another human being. The entire room was filled with her competence, confidence, and intelligence. I thought she magnificent. I subsequently endured an absolutely ghastly interview as she grilled me about my less than stellar undergraduate performance and the impact my low grades had on my ability to adequately treat a patient with this condition and that condition. It was just interminable. Just a month before she died, I asked Helen why she ever admitted me to graduate school. And her response was, quote, "Because you told me you majored in bridge," unquote. She valued honesty, and Helen has a long history of giving dark horses a chance. Because I lived in Valencia during those graduate school days, I commuted to Rancho and stayed on the campus Tuesday and Thursday nights. I had a camper at the time, so thought nothing of overnighting and washing up in Building 30 as soon as it opened. Somehow Helen became aware of the fact that I was camping on the Rancho grounds and had a fit about it because she deemed it unsafe. So she subsequently insisted I stay at her home. During those evenings, we shared our mutual love of music and books. We sometimes stayed up for hours singing Gilbert and Sullivan and other classics, which were so darn much fun. Helen had a marvelous voice. She taught me Scottish history and poetry, and I shared with her New England Yankee lore and the history of the world's tallest mountains and the climbers that had managed to scale their heights. Thus began our very quirky 41-year friendship. As with most highly intelligent people, Helen had a complex personality. She was fiercely loyal to her friends, her family, physical therapy, USC, and a variety of causes. She was a phenomenal visionary, but could not tell you what was in the refrigerator. Obviously, mac and cheese. Helen could at times be rather mercurial, and she had firmly held belief how and when things should be done, whether or not her vision was rooted in reality. She could ruffle feathers and yet be incredibly sensitive. Her sense of humor was absolutely terrific, and she could laugh at herself. To illustrate, for years we camped for several weeks during the summer in the Sierra Nevada mountains, the Cascades, or the Wasatch Range in Utah. Helen loved to fish, and one year she brought a blow-up raft so that she could paddle out to the big ones. She did enjoy several hours of fishing, but then it was time to come to shore for dinner. Well, the bottom of the raft was round, and so was Helen. Thus, getting Helen out of the raft was like controlling a marble on a tabletop. It probably took 8 people to extricate Helen from that raft, but the job was made all the more difficult by the fact that she was laughing so hard. 5 years ago, Helen asked if I would help her revise the Daniels and Williams muscle testing book. I flew to North Carolina, where she was living, and spent the weekend where we outlined what was needed to go into the book and what should be deleted. It became evident during the subsequent visit that Helen was having health issues and that she could not, in all reality, revise the book to her standards. Nonetheless, she had fantastic insights throughout the task and was at all times in charge. I learned a tremendous amount of APTA history during the 3 years it took to get the book to a publishable state, and I would not trade those wonderful moments we spent together. The last time I spoke with Helen was about a month before she died. We had a fun and funny conversation about a gentleman friend that she had met in the nursing home. Apparently, the two of them regaled each other with stories, and you could image the scene. In spite of Helen's decline, the essence of Helen was still very much in evidence. Now Helen is gone, an extraordinary tour de force that physical therapy will never know again. She touched the lives of thousands and made an enormous difference to those of us who were fortunate enough to come within her sphere. I am so privileged to have known her as a mentor, colleague, and teacher, but most of all, as a friend.
I had so many faculty over the years. I hired faculty that had all the credentials but weren't worth the paper they were written on, and they didn't stay. I mean, they obviously did not stay. If you can't be productive, you couldn't be in our department. That was, the bottom line. I didn't care if you were productive clinically or productive in research, but you had to be productive. You couldn't just come in and give lectures based on hot air.
Now we'll hear from two faculty members who did stay and were productive, and who'll share some of their remembrances of Helen, Rob Landell and Beth Fisher.
Everyone knows the Helen who yelled, made demands, pontificated, and ruled with an iron fist. I am blessed to have known a different Helen, and Rob and I were given the great opportunity not to talk about Helen Hislop, the icon, but Helen, the person, wise, generous, and kind.
I had a smile on my face while I was driving here today because although the occasion is sad and I truly miss her, she made me smile, and that's what I recall the best. There's lots of stories that I could tell about Helen, but I have to be brief, so I'll just tell you a few. We all know that she had a magnificent voice, an orator's voice, and she was absolutely stunning on stage, but she could really use that voice to great effect off the stage as well. And I remember her assistant, Janet Cogorno at the time, had her office across the hall from Helen. And if Helen wanted something from Janet, she would just yell from her office to Janet, "Janet, where are my keys? Janet, get me those files." And I could hear her from my office down the hallway. I don't think she ever used or even knew if she had an intercom in her office. There was a time that she spent an hour yelling at me for something I'd done. Don't ask. At least it seemed like an hour. I found out later that although my office door was closed during this whole session, the entire staff of the department had left because they couldn't stand it anymore. At one time there was a group of us standing in the hallway, and the group included Mike O'Donnell, whose nickname from long ago was Otis, O.D. O'Donnell, Otis. And we were standing there talking, and from way down at the other end of the hall, Helen was coming down the hallway, and she's yelling at us from down the hall. She's yelling, Tito, I need to talk to you. And we all looked at one another, and well, no Tito here, so we just, kept talking. And she get closer, Tito, I'm talking to you. Listen to me when I'm talking to you. Well, Tito, I don't see a Tito. So she comes up to us and right up to Mike, and she's like, Tito, I'm talking to you. You answer to me when I'm talking to you. And we're like, Tito Jackson? Tito Fuentes? Tito who? And then suddenly it dawned on us, oh, Otis. You mean Otis, not Tito. Otis, Tito, I don't care. You come with me. In 1995, Helen was the keynote speaker at the World Confederation of Physical Therapy meeting in Washington, D.C., and I sat in the audience surrounded by PTs from all over the world, and we introduced ourselves to one another, and when they found out that I worked at USC and worked with Helen, they were literally awestruck, and not of me, of Helen, and the fact that I knew and worked with her, and that was the first time that I truly understood the international renown and reputation that she had. And yet, as she wowed the crowd, there's 6,000, 7,000 people in this hall and standing room only, and she did one of her typical, patented, magnificent speeches. All I could hear in the back of my head was, "Janet, get me my keys." And, Tito, I'm talking to you. So I feel very fortunate that I was one of those who, as Mary Beth Brown puts it, wandered into her world. In my case, it was very much by accident. She was my research advisor in PT school and my boss for 20 years. But boy, what a privilege, and I truly miss her.
I need to warn you, I haven't been able to think about this memorial without crying because of the most remarkable impact she had on my life during the darkest hour of my life. I began my teaching career at USC, hired by Helen as adjunct faculty to teach the clinical management of the neurologic patient in August 1990. It was the same month, same year that my husband was dying across the street at Norris Comprehensive Cancer Hospital. Two profound memories of Helen during that time are intimately embedded in my being, because not only did the experiences become a critical part of my own healing, but also became an essential part of what I was able to then go on to give to patients and students. She had that ability to provide you with gifts and life lessons that you were then able to continually pass along to others. However blurry everything was at that time, two memories are crystal clear. Dr. Hislop running a large and complex department and showing up daily in the ICU with bags of food, lunch for everyone. Every day for weeks she was there. The second memory was unfathomable and overwhelming. Arriving at the cemetery and seeing every single student that I'd been hired to teach, students that had had only a few classes with me, that barely knew me, that had come to USC to become physical therapists, every one of them was there at the funeral. I later heard from the students that Helen had come to class on the day that Richard died and did not demand, but keenly persuaded them all to go to the funeral. She said to them that their being there would enable me to return to them. And as she was correct about everything, that was definitely something that she knew for sure.
I want University of Southern California to retain its reputation and reality of superiority. I want it to remain the school everybody looks to what a PT school should be. You need to keep that leadership. You need to hire people that will bring in new ideas, that they will be allowed to use those new ideas, that they'll be able to prove that their new ideas work, and they need to be given leeway and time. You have to have time to think. You have to have time to talk like you're crazy. And somebody will eventually hear and say, "You're not crazy. That's a good idea."
Now we'll hear from another faculty member who was very close to Helen and also to another very important person, Dr. Jacqueline Perry. That's Chris Powers.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to speak with you today and to finish up today's memorial. My concluding remarks today are going to be focused on what I'll call the Hislop-Perry legacy. Like many of us in the room, it's really difficult to talk about Helen Hislop without mentioning Jacqueline Perry, because in my mind, in the mind of all of our minds, they were a team. And these were two remarkable women who shared a very common vision. And that vision was to improve society by bettering the professions that they loved, namely orthopedic surgery and physical therapy. And as you heard today, their contributions at Rancho really set the foundation for what physical therapy is today. As many of you know, Jacqueline Perry passed away earlier this year, and this has been a very sad year for our profession as we have lost two of our giants. Hopefully the slides are advancing. Jacqueline Perry, as many of you know, was a pioneer in orthopedic surgery and was at Rancho in the early formative years. She pioneered surgical procedures for patients with neurological disorders. And any orthopedic surgeon in the country certainly knows who Jacqueline Perry is. But perhaps Dr. Perry's largest contribution to the profession of physical therapy was her development and really promotion of movement analysis as a fundamental aspect of the clinical decision-making process for the orthopedic surgeon. And as it turns out, it now will become the defining principle that is based on, that physical therapy is now based. She, along with many other people at Rancho, including Vern Nickel and even Dan Antonelli, who's here today, were instrumental in pioneering the technology that went into the development of the first gait lab in the country. And rightfully so was called the Biokinesiology Laboratory. Now, there have been several mentions of Dr. Hislop's famous Mary McMillan lecture. And in that lecture, she stated that pathokinesiology, in other words, the study of abnormal movement, should be the distinguishing clinical science of physical therapy. Now, we could probably debate who came up with the term pathokinesiology. And in reality, it probably doesn't even matter. But I think Dr. Perry's influence was certainly evident in this most profound statement. And I firmly believe that this statement was probably the most important, as it really truly defined the role of the physical therapist. And I have no doubt that Dr. Perry had a very strong hand in this. Now, I think both Dr. Hislop and Dr. Perry would be very proud of the fact that 40 years later, the APTA, the House of Delegates, adopted a new vision statement for the profession. And quite simply stated, movement is at its fundamental core. Now, it basically took us 40 years to get and implement what Dr. Perry and Dr. Hislop had preached for nearly half a century. And I think this is really a defining moment in our profession, and unfortunately, neither of them are here today to see the fruits of their labor. Now, when in her last years at USC, Dr. Hislop was developing the DPT program, and she knew that research had to be at its core. And during those years, I was doing my PhD from 91 to 96. She was working feverishly on developing the DPT curriculum. At the same time, she was also developing the research infrastructure that would support this new doctorate in physical therapy. And by no surprise, the development of a movement analysis lab or a biomechanics lab was at its center. And I was most fortunate to graduate at the year that the musculoskeletal biomechanics lab was created. And along with George Salem, my partner in crime, I think George is here somewhere, we were the first directors of the biomechanics lab at USC, which, by no surprise, was modeled directly after the pathokinesiology lab at Rancho. Obviously, Dr. Perry had a very strong hand in this. But Helen felt very strongly that having this type of lab in our division was critical. Helen was most proud of this laboratory, as she was of all the laboratories that she developed. When visitors would come visit the department, she would give these grandiose tours, and the first stop on her tour was always the anatomy lab. In fact, there's only one thing she was more proud of, and that was her anatomy lab. In fact, more specifically, she was more proud of the fact that she could flush the anatomy floor. And that would be the first thing she would do in every tour, would be go into the anatomy lab, look, I can flush the floor. And then she'd go right across the hall and show off her biomechanics lab. She was enthralled by the fact that we create stick figures and have them walk across the screen, which at that point in time was pretty cool technology. 2 years later, Jacqueline Perry donated $250,000 to the department to establish the Jacqueline Perry Fund for the study of movement disorders. And this fund was directed specifically to my laboratory. And this money was used specifically for students studying biokinesiology in the area of gait analysis and movement analysis. In 2010, we dedicated, with Helen's permission, of course, we dedicated the laboratory at USC in Jacqueline's honor. And it is now known as the Jacqueline Perry Musculoskeletal Biomechanics Research Laboratory, which is very hard to put all that on a paper. The vision of Dr. Hislop and Dr. Perry has influenced a generation, perhaps now 2 generations, of students studying movement analysis at its core. We are fortunate to have our program in biokinesiology, our PhD and our MS. Over 50 of our PhD students have benefited directly from Jacqueline Perry's endowment. Like many of us in the room, Jacqueline Perry and Dr. Hislop were our mentors. And for me personally, they were both very instrumental in my career. Helen would never meet about dissertation topics at school, probably because she was too busy yelling at everybody else. We would always have to meet at her house. And like Mary Beth Brown was just telling us, I learned quite a bit by my travels to Dr. Hislop's house. First of all, every time I would show up, the first thing we had to do is feed the dogs. And I'm not much of an animal person, but I had to learn very quickly how to feed the dogs. You probably also didn't realize that Dr. Perry and Dr. Hislop lived right next door to each other. And I don't know if anyone knew that or not. Which for me, as a new PhD student, was quite discerning, because Dr. Perry was no more than a quick walk away when the discussion turned to data that needed clarification. And there was many times where, I remember this one time specifically, Dr. Perry was walking the dog right across the way, and Helen just yelled out the window, "Jackie, get in here. We have to discuss this." That was the life with Dr. Hislop and Dr. Perry. In many respects, I feel like I have a torch to carry. Dr. Hislop and Dr. Perry are gone, but it is up to us, the next generation, to carry on their legacy. I know, you walk down our hallways at USC, there are 2 portraits, and it's of Dr. Hislop and Dr. Perry. And their vision will be remembered forever within this profession. One of my proudest moments professionally was when I received the research award, the publication award, in Dr. Hislop's name. I guess this pretty much ruins it because nothing else really matters to me from this point on. And I think she was proud as well. But for me, standing up at the podium and having Helen present to you an award in her name was probably the highlight, will be the highlight of my career. Like Mary Beth was talking about, my introduction into the USC world was by chance. My decision to enter into a PhD was purely at a whim, and I literally cold called Helen to ask her about the PhD program because I was interested in it. And her response to me over the phone was, well, I don't even know you. You didn't go to USC. You need to get down here so I can meet you. And so I got in the car, I was in Santa Barbara at the time, and I came down and I sat in Dr. Hislop's office just like Mary Beth did. And I was warned before I had gone down there that there are two people at USC that eat small children for breakfast. And that is Helen Hislop and Jacqueline Perry. And to be honest with you, I've never met a nicer person in my life. She embraced me from day one. In fact, that afternoon we drove right down the Rancho where I met Jacqueline Perry. And myself, Jacqueline Perry, and Sarah Mulroy all had lunch at Baker Square in Downey. And that is where I made my decision that, yes, this is where I need to be. And the rest is history. So in conclusion, I think all of us are here to celebrate the life of Helen Hislop. We're here also to remember Jacqueline Perry and the team and the vision that they have created for us. It is up to us now to carry it on and train the next generation. I think we're up for it, and I think, as Helen would probably want us to do, let's get rolling. Thank you very much.
Helen Hislop could turn a phrase. I'd like to read to you an expanded version of this quote. This is from the Macmillan Lecture in 1975. This is Helen's words. My overriding dream is that physical therapy shall achieve greatness as a profession. Our aims may be noble, our virtues admirable, our sins minimal, and our practice moral. But without the saving merit of a habitual vision of greatness, its attainment is impossible. If we do not achieve greatness, what we do or what we believe does not matter. We shall be no more noticed than sand dropped and buried with more of its kind at the bottom of the hourglass of time. Physical therapy stands at what could be the beginning of a new era, an era in which science is our quest and humaneness our expression, an era in which physical therapy can constitute a bridge over which science and man's dignity maintain contact. The issue is clear. If greatness is a goal, it will take great thinking and consummate honesty to achieve it. For Helen Hislop, there was no if. For Helen Hislop, greatness was ever a goal, but never an end in itself. For Helen Hislop, greatness was the act of continually striving toward excellence. She never ceased in that striving in her lifetime. Now that she's left this world, we can say that her striving is over. She has achieved that greatness. Helen's words will continue to inspire us, and her accomplishments will influence the course of our profession and the lives of our patients for years to come, as long as we hold on to our memory of Helen. This brings our ceremony to a close. I'd like to say a brief thank you to all of the faculty and staff who worked on this ceremony, but most especially I'd like to recognize Julie Tilson, who's up in the control booth up there, and really has worked extraordinarily hard on this and was always one of Helen's favorites, and actually Helen brought Julie here. So thank you very much, Julie. Anyone who wishes to stay for a little while can join us outside for coffee and refreshments. We have more under the tent. Also, I'd like to mention that that this ceremony has been videotaped, and that will be available. We can send you a link to that, or it'll be on our website. Thank you. Good afternoon.
My name is Josette Antonelli, and I have known Dr. Hislop for a long time. We met about 40 years ago when my husband was working at Rancho, and later on I came and worked for her in her office, and I was told to do some office things and interact with the students, and I really appreciated the care that she had for the students. And I finally I was working part-time at first, and then I came full-time. And we moved on the medical campus, and that was another big thing to adapt to. And all I can say, I talked to her for the very last time this year on her birthday. And it was a very long conversation. And I wish I had been able to talk to her again one more time. And that's all I have to say about it.
I'm Dan Antonelli. I'm an engineer. I taught for a while in the PT school, but basically I taught physics to the PT students. I started working with Helen when the PT school was at Rancho, Los Amigos, and she used the gate lab over there for training and experiments with the PT school. And then when they moved up here, she asked me to build the gate lab. And so I did, and ran it for a little while. And then I got old enough that I was too old to keep it up, and so I retired. But over the many, many years that I worked with Helen, we got to be friends. We used to go to dinner together. She'd come to our house on holidays, and so we were I didn't exactly work for her, but I wouldn't describe myself as a colleague either, because she had very few people who could be described as colleagues. She was an exceptional person, and we miss her a lot. We stayed in touch with her when she retired to the East Coast, and in fact my wife talked to her on her birthday just a few days before she passed away. So we do miss her, and we think the PT school exists because of her, at least in its present form. And the doctorate wouldn't have occurred without her. So she made enormous contributions, and we miss her a lot.
After I retired from the dental school, physical therapy were looking for help, and so they called me up, and I went for really following heart surgery. I went for the interview, and it worked. So Dr. Hislop was the one who really hired me. And all the time we had communications about the lab, about the work, about the class, and about everything. One thing I remember about her is at that time she said, "I am the oldest survivor of my family." And it was so good that she survived years beyond that.
Hi, my name is Olfat Mohammed, and I have known Dr. Hislop since 1983. I came from Egypt, Cairo, Egypt, on a scholarship, and I started my PhD at USC. Helen Hislop was a host family for us. I came with 2 children and with my husband, and she just received us with open arms. She took care of not only school things and making life better at school and easier at school, but also she made sure that she brings Christmas gifts for the children, and she visits us when we needed help. We went through quite a few tough times and obstacles, but she was always there as a friend, a colleague, an advisor, a professor. She has definitely contributed to our success as a family and to my success as a professional. I will always remember her with very fond memories.
I'm Neil Sturman, and I'm a 1976 graduate of the USC Physical Therapy program. And Dr. Hislop was my thesis advisor and one of my professors. And I remember her as incredibly smart, just really, really brilliant, and a little intimidating how smart she was. I remember being in this neurology class with her, and my hand couldn't go fast enough to take down all the notes. She was just throwing out so much information about different neurologic conditions and explaining them. It was just making my head spin. It was just, and it was all semester long, never stopped. And she just was always so intelligent and well-spoken. I really admired her. I think, aside from the content of what I was learning, she really was an example of somebody who used her mind and used her, her intention to develop the field of physical therapy and to help us become, good clinicians and good therapists. So she was, there was that element of inspiration that I think made a big difference. So when I was in the program in general, there were a number of people like her who just were excellent, and up till that point, I don't think I had experienced that caliber of person and somebody with that kind of a motivation. And so I really admired her and, felt she influenced me in a very positive way.
My name is Claire Beekman, and I'm a physical therapist, and I worked at Rancho Los Amigos Medical Center. And I knew Helen when the USC program was housed on the Rancho campus. That's when I first met her. But then I would see her very often with USC things and APTA and other physical therapy things. And Helen made mosaics, and they were very lovely. I never saw very many of them, but the ones I saw were really beautiful. And I would always ooh and ah when I saw one. And you can imagine with Helen being so creative, these were really very creative. And so one year, one of my friends who had received a mosaic from Helen gifted that mosaic to me, which I have in a place of honor at my house. And it's about 12 inches by 12 inches with green and brown tiles, and they're about as big as your thumbnail. And it is beautiful. And I think of Helen every time I look at it.
So my name is Carol Lee Winstein, and I first met Helen when I was a therapist at Rancho in the 70s, early 70s. I decided to go back for my master's degree, and so I started taking classes in the program right around that time. And then I finished my master's degree, and Helen was, of course, very involved in the master's program during that period, and very inspiring. She used to hold classes in her home with her dogs, and there'd be about 5 or 6 of us, very informally, gathered around in her living room, sitting on the floor, reading papers and, showing slides and using overheads. And in fact, I ran across a set of notes the other day from that period on how to give a seminar. So then I went back for my PhD, and I remember talking to Helen a lot about when to do that and how to do that. I went off to the crosstown rival, to UCLA, and kept in touch, and then went off and did a postdoc in Wisconsin, and then I came back and was offered a job at USC in 1990. And so I reconnected with Helen at that time, and really saw what a visionary she was. You know, she went after things that for that period nobody had really thought about. And this was what was so amazing about her, is that she could see that these things were important. And, you know, she had to get people on board to say, yeah, this is great. There was a lot of, you know, controversy during that period. Where should the profession be going? And what should we do? But she was always there with that vision. You know, she couldn't figure out how to use the phone in her office, but those things didn't matter to her. What mattered to her was this vision. And that's the legacy that she has left us, and really inspired, you know, people that, not only people that she worked with and were in her immediate environment, but people way beyond who connected with her. And I'm so pleased that I had a chance to know her and, you know, really have an opportunity to work with her.
All right, my name is John Bro. I was a student of Dr. Hislop's in the mid to late 80s, and she was very influential in my life at that time. I particularly remember just how her mastery of language, spoken and written, and also her knowledge of just science. She was so well-rounded, and she had very high standards, which I think was important for me at that time. And just a little anecdote was she was my research advisor with 2 other students. We did our research project, we collected our data. She didn't have anything to do with collecting the data, but when it came time to writing the paper, we sort of had writer's block. We had never done this before. We really didn't know where to start. And she could sense that. She invited us to her home on a Saturday morning. Amongst her dogs, we sat down, and within less than 5 minutes, she looked at the data and she just started talking about what we should write right off the top of her head. It was brilliant. We furiously wrote down these words, and I'll be eternally grateful. Thank you.
I'm going to address my words directly to you, Helen, and here's what I want to say. I hope you are catching great big salmon and resting warmly next to a hot fire while you're camping somewhere up in heaven. My name is George Salem. I was hired by Helen about 17 years ago to put together an anatomy program and help get the musculoskeletal biomechanics research laboratory off the ground. I'm so thankful, Helen, that you trusted me with that charge. Even though I wasn't a physical therapist, I know that was tough to trust me or to know that I knew anything about movement, but you did, and we were able to put together one of the best anatomy programs in the country and clearly one of the best research programs in the country. So thankful for your support for me and for my students and for this program. We miss you very much. God bless.
My name is Charles Magistro. It seems like I've known Helen for 100 years, but it's only been 63. I met her in Los Angeles at a conference that APTA was having in Los Angeles, and it seems that Helen and I have been close friends ever since. We interact frequently. We've been terribly involved in all of the affairs of the profession over this long period of time. We've been not only professional colleagues, we've been personal friends as well. And I view this occasion as something they couldn't have kept me away from, because I owe Helen very, very much. And I have a great deal of respect for her and for what she's done for our profession.
So my name's Julie Tilson. I am a former student of Dr. Hislop's, and she had the most incredible influence on my career because I was actually going to PT school at a different school, and I decided because of some major issues that I wanted to transfer, and nobody transfers in PT school. That's just not something that's done. And but I wanted to transfer, and I contacted her with the help of some faculty at the school I was at. And she said, well, we'll think about it. And then she came back and said, I don't think it's going to work. And I said, can I just come out and meet you? And she said, yes, you can come out. So I flew to Southern California, and I went in, and she sat me down on the couch in her office, and she grilled me. And we talked and we talked and we talked. And at the end of the conversation, she gave me a t-shirt that said USC Physical Therapy, which basically told me I was in. And I got to transfer. And I transferred. I started in the second year class, and she worked very hard to make that happen logistically and was a huge supporter. She really made me feel like I had a responsibility to make everything I could of my professional career. And I thank her for putting that pressure on me to do great things, and for her warmth and love, and just continuing to be such a supporter of me over the years.
I'm Jo Ochoa, and I met Dr. Hislop in 1984 when she hired me to be the admissions coordinator while we were at Rancho Los Amigos. I became admissions coordinator for 7 years. In the meantime, we moved to USC Health Sciences campus because Rancho had been demolished by the earthquake in 1987, and our building was no longer inhabitable. But in 1990, Dr. Hislop and Kathy Bice sat down with me and said they were going to make me the coordinator of clinical education. And I had never heard of such a thing because I was not a PT. And she said, well, this would be the first in the country. You'd be responsible for clinical internships, but you'd be working with a faculty member who was a physical therapist. And people in Washington and the APTA just really wondered about that. But it was a success, and I did it for 13 years until I retired 9 years ago. Helen had an immense heart. She really was generous to people, caring to people, but she could be very stern when she felt it was necessary. But I feel my life is richer because I met her.
Hi, my name is Walt Weiss, and I am a former student of Dr. Hislop's 27 years ago here at USC, and also was lucky enough to have her as my research advisor for my dissertation. Many fond memories of Dr. Hislop as a phenomenal speaker, very entertaining, very choice words that were so colorful, and her lectures were just amazing. I also had several opportunities to make her laugh during class, and one of my memories was she's pretty famous for never letting the facts get in the way of a good story, as they say. Also wasn't that worried about how words should be spelled, and didn't worry too much about correct spelling when she was telling her stories or writing on the board. So she was writing on the board talking about pain relief and the different ways that you can relieve pain. And as she was writing it, she said, R-E-L. Can anyone here spell relief for me? So I raised my hand and said, R-O-L-A-I-D-S. Which 28 years ago was a very funny commercial, how do you spell relief? And she just stopped her lecture, busted up laughing, and said, you got me good, Walt. All right, now, where was I? And it went downhill from there. But as I said, many wonderful memories. She was truly an inspiration, truly a wonderful, incredible leader in the field of physical therapy, and many of us will continue to be inspired throughout our careers.
My name is Jeff Carr, and I had the pleasure of knowing Dr. Hislop back when I started in PT school at USC in 1988. And certainly sparkling wit, a great intellect, and somebody who is very inspiring in so many ways. But one part that really spoke to me that I was always impressed with and have shared with students ever since then is she was talking about in a clinical course, if there's a pressure sore that a patient you're treating has, it's your responsibility. And that idea of taking responsibility, not saying, oh, well, the nurses are there more, the doctor, you know, he's getting paid more, has more training, whatever. No, no, no. If you're dealing with the patient, you look at them holistically, you take responsibility as much as you can for every single aspect of their care. And it's a classic of the character she had.
I'm Karen Frederick, class of 1987 at USC in physical therapy, and I met Dr. Hislop around 1985 when I started the program back on the Rancho campus. And instantly you knew she was a force to be reckoned with in her stature, in her voice, and when I heard it today on the memorial, it was as if no time had passed from 1985 to 2010 when they taped that. But the two philosophical things that I think she really imparted to me was, one, gait is something every physical therapist should have on their business card. It is what we should be experts at. She really focused on that element of our movement analysis. But more globally for me was change. Be a change agent. And I remember those words, just be a change agent. And I think in my career and in my life, I've been able to embrace change because of her encouragement to be a change agent. And I hope I will continue to do that in her honor, in our profession.